Yes, it's another Confessions podcast here from your friends at Radio 2. Some really bad tales this week. We have from the Radio 2 Sinners a creative collection, including a touch of Spinal Tap, Status Quo style, a French farce fantastique, Martin Simpson's Muttley Misdeed, live from the Folk Awards, and a Boys Will Be Boys Blue Tack Bender. It's all coming now. Another drive time confession with the collective in and assembled, Sister Pauline, Brother Matthew, and surprisingly making a rare appearance.
How dare you?
The Dean
I've
is
got
here.
into a lot of trouble.
Yeah, what you cancelled.
It's only because my line's part suspended I'm doing this.
Thanks very much. I thought you just had a voiceover cancellation or something like that.
Oh,
anyway.
I only do voice unders anyway.
So here's tonight's confession, which starts off fairly unique. Anyway, I'll tell you it's from Steve Rossi, okay?
Yep.
Dear Dr. Mosh...
Oh dear.
And the Confessional Collective. Nothing.
This is already looking good.
Oh, here we go.
I play in a Status Quo tribute band.
Oh, yes.
And wish to seek forgiveness for my misdemeanour, which can probably best described as a spinal tap moment over a mix-up we caused to a bride and her groom on a wedding night.
Oh, no.
As Dr. Mosh is a well-renowned rocker, I've addressed this to him in the hope that he may be slightly more sympathetic towards me than the rest of the collective. But firstly, I need to give you a little insight into our band. We call ourselves the Four Rosses. And rather than be a conventional tribute band by wearing dodgy wigs and trying to look like our heroes, we all just dress up as Francis Rossi and play Quo album tracks and singles from the 70s and early 80s, which is the music we all grew up with and still love to this day. Hence, this is from Steve Rossi, okay?
Yeah.
Our drummer, Terry Rossi, came up with the idea that women fancy guys in uniform, so with that in mind, he persuaded us all to wear Francis Rossi uniform, which comprises, as you'll know, of white grandad collar shirt with black waistcoat, blue jeans and trainers, hence the name, the Four Rosses. Impressive, huh?
Yeah. So far.
We played a gig a couple of years ago at a hotel in Hertfordshire.
Lovely.
The main function room was a separate building and being used for a wedding reception complete with resident disco. And we were due to play in the bar. While we were in the process of setting up our equipment, the manager came over to me and said, due to a late cancellation, a hotel room had become available, and it had now been set aside for us to use as a changing room. He then handed me the key and gave me directions as to how to get to the room. This was his mistake, as it is an unwritten rule with bands to 1, never trust a bass player with a key, 2, never trust a bass player with directions, 3, never say to a bass player, are you clear with that? Because the answer will be a typical bloke response of, yeah, thanks, that's fine, when I'm actually not taking much notice of what I'm being told. Somehow the tag showing the room number that was attached to the key when it was given to me earlier had disappeared. But I felt this was unimportant, and once everything was all set up and working, the four of us trundled over across the forecourt in the direction of the room that I thought was ours. However, when we got there, the key didn't fit the lock. Therefore, I tried the 2 adjoining rooms, both unsuccessfully. I then attempted to try and open a number of rooms on the other side of the forecourt, all to no avail, and by now I was starting to receive some serious ribbing from the rest of the Quo band that I'm in. Rather than approach the manager to ask for directions again, which obviously I couldn't do because I'm a bloke, and blokes don't ask directions, I felt it made more sense to wander around aimlessly in the hope of finding the room by luck rather than judgment. So, complete with band in tow, we eventually came to some steps that climbed to another part of the hotel, and by this time I was getting a really hard time from them. So, closely followed by the band, I headed towards the first room on this level, and as I put the key in the door, I found it was actually unlocked, but I chose not to say this to the rest of the guys. I just said, I'm here, this is it, this is the correct room. As it happened, it was an extremely nice room, much better than the usual gents' toilet that we normally get to change in. It was at this point I had a certain niggling feeling that maybe something wasn't quite right, but I chose to ignore it. I just said, well, wow, this must be it. We all changed into our Francis Rossi outfits and then sat down and helped ourselves to cups of tea, coffee, and ate every single one of the complimentary biscuits.
Oh, no.
Then room service delivered beer and wine in an ice bucket.
Oh,
it's getting better by the minute.
What a result. We were at last being treated like the rock superstars that we knew that we really were. Soon after, and quite unexpectedly, there was a bang against the door and then a fumbling door handle, followed by a preoccupied and amorous bride and groom stumbling into our room. First, they looked somewhat puzzled.
Really?
Yeah. They wondered if they'd come into the wrong room. They apologised momentarily, went back out again.
Good.
And then as realisation crept in, came back into the room, looked at us curiously and wondered why there were 4 Francis Rosses waiting for them in the bridal suite. That certain niggling feeling had proved correct after all, and now it was left to me to explain how the mix-up had occurred. The bride, after recovering from her initial surprise, actually appeared to be visibly relieved by this, well, albeit slightly, and said, "Well, thank heavens for that. One of my nutty friends is a big Quo fan, and for a minute I thought she'd arranged for some Francis Rossi strippergrams." At this point,
Off you go.
Dave Rossi quipped up, "Well, if you'd arrived 10 minutes earlier, love, that's exactly what you'd have got." Surprisingly, no one laughed at that.
Not even the others. Oh.
I thought we should apologise for eating and drinking our way through their newly married bounty.
Wow.
Can you imagine that? Yeah.
Just a bounty. Yeah.
Yes, they had that as well. Very good. Fortunately for us, she seemed reasonably understanding, and later that evening, still in full wedding regalia, both bride and groom, who we now found were called Linda and Anthony, deserted their own wedding reception and, complete with parents, guests and strange friend, took to our dance floor, put their hands on their hips to do the Quo dance, to Something About You Baby I Like and Down Down. So, firstly, I have to ask forgiveness for convincing the hotel manager that he was okay to entrust me with the key to one of his hotel rooms. And secondly, I need forgiveness for unintentionally gate-crashing the bridal suite of the bride and the groom on their wedding night, using it as a band changing room, eating all their stuff, and for one of the Rosses using their bathroom. Took out the next paragraph. If you can see...
Come on.
If you... No.
Just a hint. Just a hint.
Oh, come on. If you can see your way to forgiving me, it would be greatly appreciated. I await your judgment in anticipation. However, if you choose not to forgive me, I shan't lose too much sleep over it.
All right, fair
Rock
enough.
and roll! Steve Rossi from the Four Rosses. Let's see what happens here. Sister Pauline.
Well, I think I can forgive almost everything, because men are incredibly dopey when it comes to not just asking for directions or going back and admitting they made a stupid mistake. And
Sorry?
apparently rockers are the worst of that kind, so Matt keeps telling me. So all of that's perfectly normal behaviour, I imagine. And I thought if the bride wasn't that bothered, then you know why. But they used the bathroom. That's when it all went wrong. That last
Right at the
line was
very end.
sufficient
We
for
draw
me.
a line at that, do we?
I'm not bothered about the shortbread biscuits
No.
and the sachets of tea, but they used the bathroom
You should
in
see
the
what I took
bridal
out.
suite.
Oh, dear.
That's the most alarming thing. No, I can't forgive that. Everything else, but not using the bathroom.
The Dean of Deadliness.
Oh, gosh. You told me last week that you usually you don't forgive.
Not for bathroom misdemeanours.
Oh, God. Let me make a note of that. Fine. Well, the hotel manager was an idiot, to be fair, letting them have the key. So there's no problem there. So you're forgiven as far as that's concerned. As far as the bride and groom, well, they had to use the what were they supposed to do when they got to the bathroom stage of getting ready for the event? What were they supposed to do at that point?
Well, obviously they didn't know it was going to be the bride and grooms, but nonetheless, I'm not forgiving them. They shouldn't have been there.
No follow-up questions.
You're
Don't
so
they
harsh. You're so harsh. And the bride and groom, they were up for some fun anyway, so I wouldn't have worried about it. So I forgive totally. Dr. Mosh, though, he won't.
Yes, well,
I
it's
just
all-
know.
it
I
was-
just know.
it's your
Here's the thing. Who remembers their room number? No one ever remembers. As soon as you're told where you're going in a hotel.
That's why
No,
it's-
exactly. So what are you doing, losing the bit that on your key that tells you where your room is? No one ever remembers that. So for that, I would not forgive. However, that said, they were doing and concentrating on the Quo period from the 70s and early 80s. And for that reason alone, I'm going to forgive, because there wouldn't have been any of that hula boola Quo nonsense that we've had to put up with
Yeah,
of
that was-
late.
I love
So, yes, I'm going to forgive just because you chose the right period of Quo to go for.
Like this. This one comes from Frank. We appreciate your confession. Thank you, Frank, dear Father Simon and the Forgiving Three. Here's a confession that revolves around grammar schools, silly nicknames, and involves not one but 3 foreign languages, and a case of using all the information at your disposal to make an informed decision, or as it's commonly called, cheating. My plea for absolution goes back to my time at our local boys' grammar school in the 1970s. This school fondly remembered being a private school, hence masters rather than teachers, fives courts, and a Latin motto.
We had 5s.
Non quo sed quo modo, or as Dr. Mosh might say, nothing but the quo.
Oh, yeah.
That's what our school... Actually, it means not what, but how.
Oh,
It's hardly an inspiring motto, really. I
No.
would have thought for a school. Anyway,
a bit confusing.
in the summer of 1973, I sat my French O-level, part of which was the dreaded oral examination. This involved, as some of your listeners might remember, being recorded conversing in French with the French teacher. French master, I beg your pardon. In our case, Larry Adler, nicknamed after the famous harmonica player. This usually one-sided conversation, I remember this too well,
Yes.
involved a discussion about one of 3 French books that we had to read in the lead up to the exam. These books were L'Agent Secret, which is The Secret Agent,
Oui.
a very simple tale of World War II resistance fighters.
Great.
15 contes, 15 stories by Maupassant. Not quite so simple, but you get the drift of most of them. By the way, you don't have to speak in French, Deadly. At the end of each French book.
Mais je veux qu'on soit sincère et qu'on ne lâche qu'un mot qui ne part du cœur.
I'll just fade you out. That's very straightforward. And finally, Le Pipe de Maigret, Maigret's Pipe by Georges Simenon. An absolute nightmare that only a few finished and virtually no one understood.
That's all I'm going to say about that one.
Come the day of the oral, we were examined in strict alphabetical order, starting with Minnie. Don't you just hate those Ponzi nicknames, Matt?
Yeah.
Well, that's how
Is
it's
this some
written.
direct conversation?
Yes. Well, there's more to come. Babs, Charlie, not his real name. Frank, that's me again, not my real name. Ockle, Enf, Trousers, Little Henry Coburn, Swen, and all that. This was the crowd I was hanging out with. Beforehand, we'd all been told that we would be shown 3 cards with the letter B on them, and we'd have to choose one which would determine which book that we spoke about. Well, when Minnie came out, he told Babs that he'd chosen one of the cards that had B like the Greek letter beta on it.
Okay.
And it was, as it turned out, L'Agent Secret. Hooray, the simple one. So Babs told Charlie, Charlie told me, and so on. So when I went in, I pretended to ponder for a few seconds and then hesitantly chose the card with the beta on it. At this point, Larry, the teacher, was sweating, looking perplexed, and muttered something along the lines of, Zut alors, quel extraordinaire.
Well, you're doing it now.
It's in the script, man.
Oh, right. So, is there a script?
Yeah. Needless to say, I stumbled through the conversation that followed and then passed the word to Ockle as we passed down the corridor. By the time Enf came out, and Larry, the teacher, was beating the desk, using some French words that I don't think were in any of our textbooks, as he thought the exam board would think he'd fixed everything. 6 out of 6 pupils having chosen exactly the same book. He wailed, "J'ai mort!"
Oh, could you do that again? That was so good. I love that.
I think that means I'm dead.
Yes.
Je suis mort.
Je suis mort. I think.
Okay, so you got it wrong.
J'ai
Yeah,
mort.
it's wrong,
I
yes.
am dead.
Wrong French
No, I
master there.
have. That
I
sounds
have
like
death?
I have death, yes.
You have
Yes,
that.
it's the
most
French
days.
master going nowhere.
Yes.
Anyway,
It's going well,
continues Frank.
Can we get to the judging bit?
Yeah.
I'm losing interest in this.
There's no curling in this.
Mutual French interest.
When Trousers went in, he'd made up his mind, à la Sidney Carton, it's a far, far better thing than I do, to choose one of the other cards and talk about one of the more difficult books in order to dispel any thoughts of organised cheating.
Okay.
What a top bloke. As I might have said in 1973, if such a phrase had been in circulation. By the time Coburn came out, Larry had cottoned on to his original mistake and turned the other 2 Bs into betas. So Grubby, Pod, Stodgy and Buick and everyone else was at the mercy of Le Pipe de Maigret. Ha-ha! So we need to seek forgiveness here for causing our long-suffering French master such obvious distress when he thought he was going to be subject to an exam board inquiry. Although, to be fair, he'd given us 5 years of irregular verbs and future perfect tenses. But I know that doesn't absolve us from our crime of cheating in an exam. I ought to seek forgiveness from Trousers, who sacrificed himself to save the others. But he passed the Oxford entrance exam a few years later, became school captain, and has been responsible for teaching French to many a top scholar at a well-known public school. Actually, the most well-known public school. So I don't think it did him any harm in the end. Yours in absolution, it's Frank. Well, the French oral was a dreaded thing, but they worked out how to get the right book to discuss.
Yeah.
L'Agent Secret was the one you needed. If you got Le Pipe de Maigret, that was a real problem. But anyway, Sister Pauline, if she can just gather her wits together.
In the words of
And
Matt.
focus, yes.
In the words of Matt. Who hasn't done this? Who has not cheated in a French oral
I think lots of people have.
when given the opportunity? And if, like me, you were taught French by a wholly disinterested individual who spoke French with a brutal Dundonian accent, you had little alternative but to actually make a stab at trying to get through the oral. And he deliberately left us all in the same room so we could all chat about it afterwards. And it seems to me this teacher was asking for it by giving the boys the chance to communicate between. So, completely forgiven. On many counts.
So your French qualification, such as it is, doesn't really pass muster,
Not
does it?
worth the paper it's written on.
Okay.
That's my boredom earlier when you were chatting in French.
Because you didn't understand
Not
a
a word. No, but I've got a good
Deadly,
pass at all grade.
What did you say there?
Well, it sounds like Mr. Adler, his French isn't particularly good either, if it was J'ai mort.
Yeah.
Well, I reckon that's
Earlier.
probably an expression.
No, it's not.
No, you don't. I don't have death. Have you got death?
No, no
on you?
death.
Well,
no,
it's
there we
an
are, you
illness.
see. And well, it is. Well, you might be on your way to it, but, you know, and well done trousers, I say. That's what I say. And I don't like the sound of Mr. Adler anyway. So
Trousers took it all on himself, didn't he? Yes, I'm gonna go
Well
in.
done trousers. Well done you. And we thank you for it, whichever public school you were at. So I forgive.
It's a grammar school.
Yeah.
Thanks for paying attention. Brother
A grammar
Matthew.
school.
I'll tell you what I don't understand about this is this whole thing with the cards. Why are you having cards in a French oral exam? It's an exam.
It's a way of choosing an envelope.
It's not a game show. You're not on the golden shot. You're in a French oral exam.
I
I don't understand that at all. And this French master who can't speak any French, and now this guy called Trousers, who's apparently very big in some very big
He
public
went on
school.
to a public
yes,
school.
Yeah, exactly. So what is
Exactly.
going on there? I am going to forgive because, as Pauline rightly points out, we've all done it. My French oral exam involved booking sites or booking something at a campsite, and everyone basically said, make sure you know what le camping is, and you're going to be fine. So we've all done it.
Here we are in the green room at the Royal Albert Hall, and I'm delighted to say that we have the one and only Martin Simpson here for a folk confession. Hello, Martin, how are you?
I'm very trepidatious about doing this thing. I mean, I'm just hoping I get forgiven, that's all. It's worrying.
Don't worry about that. Martin is here, best album for the full English, which we've already heard about from Seth. Best album for Vagrant Stanzas, your own album, so you're up against yourself.
I'm competing with myself again. Yes, dreadful business.
You must hate yourself.
I do, yeah.
Best group for the full English, Musician of the Year. You're the man of the moment.
Well, it's nice. It's a lovely feeling.
Until this story, when obviously your reputation is going to sink through the ground.
Indeed.
Martin Simpson, what is it that you have to confess?
Well, firstly, I'd like to explain what I feel are the essential ingredients to understanding why it is that I'm here making this confession, because criminal behaviour is generally not what I'm best known for.
Yes.
But there are full mitigating circumstances, I believe. I spent most of my childhood with my father and my two elder brothers in pursuit of the study of natural history. And it was not a lightweight or half-hearted pursuit, it has to be said. Moths and butterflies, beetles and birds, flowers, lizards, frogs, toads and newts. We pursued them all with vigour, it has to be said. My first experiences of staying up late at night were actually spent in the process of a thing called sugaring, which best done on a moonless, hot and still night in the summer. The sugar in question is a mixture of molasses and pungent alcohol, rum, I believe, which we would paint on the bark of trees in Lawton Forest in North Lincolnshire. This mixture was irresistible to night-flying moths who would be attracted by the smell and would drink and become insensible. I've since spent many nights watching people drink and become insensible, but it started with moths, so there we have it. Our enthusiasm for nature study in the family resulted in my eldest brother, Jeff, becoming an excellent wildlife photographer. Famously, during the courtship of his lovely wife-to-be, Chris, he once proposed a trip into the country on a fine sunny afternoon and a walk in the woods, on which they took a blanket. The blanket was placed on the ground and Jeff crawled under it and asked Chris to cover him with vegetation so he could lie and photograph a bird at his nest. That's how serious we were about wildlife study. So inevitably into this wildlife-obsessed family, I wanted to introduce a pet. I was asked to choose a pet. I wanted to keep a snake. Seemed to me to be the perfect pet. Quiet.
Snake?
A snake.
Okay.
Quiet, fascinating, not demanding, only needing occasional feeding. It was the obvious choice as far as I was concerned. The suggestion was rapidly rebuffed, and this is where the trouble really started. Instead of a snake, my parents bought me a pair of hamsters. 2 boy hamsters, I was told. I was fairly, if not innocent, totally innocent at this point of gender and procreation. So it was of no importance in a pet. However, the fact that my pets seemed to relish biting me put me off them fairly rapidly, and the next surprise was when the 2 hamsters, the 2 boys, produced a litter of hamsterettes, and then further demonstrated their charm as pets by becoming cannibals. I actually opened the cage on one occasion and found what appeared to be the analogue of a tiny tiger skin rug. There was a hamster skin rug with a head at one end and the rest of it was completely flat and empty. So I was not very unhappy when the remaining hamster escaped and hid under the floorboards. My parents were mortified and bought me a New Zealand white rabbit. Now, New Zealand white rabbits, when they're very small, are very cute, and this thing grew very rapidly. It was a buck rabbit. I have a picture of myself holding this rabbit when I was probably about 7, and it stretches from about my mid-thigh to just below my chin, and I'm looking at it like it's about to take a lump out of me, which I suspect it was about to take a lump out of me. Now, I was a very fastidious child, it has to be said, and this buck rabbit began to display very unpleasant tendencies. So I would walk up to its hutch, and it would spin round on its front legs and pee at immensely high speed and draw a line across the front of my socks.
Nice.
Yeah. You don't want that in a pet, really.
Really?
No. So also my little girlfriend next door neighbour decided that it would be nice if my rabbit could be friends with her rabbit, and so she persuaded me to let this giant New Zealand white rabbit out of its cage to meet her rabbit. And I had no idea what it was doing, but it appeared to be killing my neighbour's rabbit, and which resulted in a lot more rabbits very soon after that. So I wasn't having a good time with pets. I really wasn't. I didn't enjoy my pets that I was given. And what happened next, I think you will understand. I was walking home from school one day, from junior school, down the Queensway, which is just across a field, actually, from where I lived. And I was walking along. Queensway is a big road, and houses, and then a dual carriageway. And in the front garden of one of the houses on the Queensway, looking at me through the gate, was a pet of my dreams. It was a Yorkshire Terrier puppy, a very small one, in the front garden, and it was looking at me. And I looked at it, and it looked at me, and it came up to the gate, and it was very, very small indeed. And I thought, gosh, it would be awful if this Yorkshire Terrier puppy escaped under the gate. It could get run over or anything if it escaped under the gate. So
Yes.
I leaned under the gate and persuaded it to come out from under the gate, and then I picked it up, and it licked my face, and that was it, really.
And you stole it.
I stole it, yeah. And I walked home across the field with this Yorkshire Terrier puppy, and I took it home, and I introduced it to my parents and said, I found this puppy. It was lost. And my parents said, oh dear, well, where was that? And I said, well, it was on Queensway. I think I know probably roughly where it came from. So my parents went to the house from whence it had escaped and told the people where it was, and they came around and collected it, and they were so utterly pleased with me for finding the puppy that they gave me a 10-shilling note.
Wow, how about that?
Well, I think
50p for younger listeners.
50p, yeah. So, and I briefly thought that I might go into dog napping and pet larceny, as it were, as a profession, but then I didn't. So,
But you did steal.
I did steal the dog,
And you got 10 shillings.
and I got paid for stealing. So,
Okay.
you know,
Well, who would have thought you could get a whole album of tortured songs out of that? I think.
yeah.
okay,
It's a country music subject, I think.
It is.
Nicking dogs.
It absolutely is. Let's see if you're going to do you forgive Martin Simpson or not, because he stole someone's dog and got 10 shillings for it, Polly McCall.
No chance at all. Liking a bit of creepy crawly nocturnal nature is no excuse for stealing someone's lovely cute puppy, and you like snakes, so no, not forgiven.
Yeah, the snake thing was slightly strange. Matt, what do you think, by the way? Your sport's on next. by
It
the way.
is, yeah.
Yes.
As ever with these things, I'm going to blame the parents. What are these parents doing? Buying you cannibal hamsters,
Indeed.
and then some kind of killer rabbit that appears to be invading everywhere else. So I'm going to forgive, just because I'm going to blame your parents.
Dear Dr. Mosh and the Confessional Collective, again, thanks for reading out my 4 Rosses and the bride confession. I'd like to thank the collective for your overall verdict of finding me not guilty, unlike my friends and family. I'd like to mention we've had a surprising amount of response via texts and emails from people who heard the show. Soon became evident that not a single person seemed to care about the hotel manager or the bride and groom. The only question that was asked was, what was in the missing paragraph about the bathroom incident in the bridal suite, and which Rossi was involved? So for your reference, I'd like to reveal it was the actual Rossi responsible for the particularly bad bathroom incident was none other than our lead guitarist, Martini Rossi, living up to his reputation of any time, any place, anywhere. Anyway, there you go. So that's just to bring you up to date. We can update confessions as we go along. Yours, please, to confessions@bbc.co.uk. This one tonight comes from Greg. By the way, Novice Nigel is welcomed into our confessional again.
Good evening, Choir Master Mayo. Yes. Moving on.
Anyway, by the way, you stole my sister's crisps last night, and
Oh.
she's very cross about it.
Oh, gosh, yes, I thought reminded. She wouldn't have one of my salted almonds, I tell you.
This is going in a
Move
particularly
on. Just
strange
move
direction.
on. Just
Dear
go.
Father Simon and the Broad-Minded Collective, says Greg, I feel the need to confess a sin that I committed over 35 years ago. It was during the late 70s. I attended a well-known preparatory school in Hampshire. When I was 11 years old, I and my best friend Kieran, now a respected dentist in the southwest of England, found ourselves in the class of Mr. Matty Denton. Mr. Denton was a universally loved and respected teacher who specialised in history and had a mellifluous delivery that made us dread the period after lunch and the ever-present threat of drooping eyelids. Nonetheless, we were eternally grateful to have avoided the parallel class with Mr. Caldecott that was populated by the more, shall we say, stolid members of our year group. Old Matty had a few faults in our eyes, but one foible did catch our attention. There was a fad at the time for that useful and eternally entertaining substance, blue tack. In our particular school, such as it became like a stress ball, a modelling substance, and 1,000 other things that it was never intended by its manufacturer to be. We would build up great fist-sized lumps of the stuff in our personal stashes, and Matty, like the rest of us, became caught up in this fad. Whenever he wandered past the desk of a boy with his head down working away and a lump of blue tack within reach, he would snatch it up and begin to furiously squeeze and stretch and otherwise manipulate the ball, probably reflecting the induced stress of trying to drum historical facts into reluctant boys' heads. We boys were pretty miffed when this happened, as the swiped blue tack invariably ended up on Matty's pile rather than back on our own desk where it started from. Our teacher was nicking it. I suspect he saw this as a good way of removing one more distraction from our scribbling, fountain pen ink-stained hands. Kieran and I decided that something had to be done to stop this annoying habit of Matty's, so we hatched a plan. Combining a significant amount from both of our personal stashes, we formed a hollowed-out ball of blue tack and emptied the contents of a very great number of our platinum, or is it platinum, pen cartridges. Did you have one of these? Did you have?
Yep.
Yeah. So how much ink in a pen cartridge?
Enough to make a mess.
Yeah.
Enough.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
they're using quite a few here to
Yeah.
fill up their blue tack ball. Anyway, we poured it into its interior, then carefully sealed it up. The trick then was to place our booby trap in a position in the room that was not too obvious, but which Matty would see. Therefore, just before his next lesson began, we set our trap. His normal lesson plan was to talk about the topic for the lesson and then set us an exercise to complete in class to help reinforce the newly gained knowledge. It is during this exercise he would commence his peripatetic activities, and this is exactly how it went on this fateful day. The lump was duly found. He took it in his hand. He walked to the front. We held our breath. He walked back amongst us. And then he started to squeeze and knead and squeeze, and the ink bomb exploded in his hands, the thin blue tack shell collapsing under his squeezing hands, propelling its contents far and wide. Some even reached Pritchard on the front row. The dawning realization of a fluid running down his wrists and dripping on his shoes hit poor Matty. With the calmness of a man who had seen active service in the armed forces in his younger days, he called an early end to the lesson and went to wash as much of the ink off his shirt cuffs as he possibly could. Kieran and I remained unapprehended. Remains of the inky splots were discovered for weeks afterwards. 2 boys claimed that they found ink in their ears a week later. That's because boys don't wash. So I need forgiveness not from Matty, who we helped to cure of a habit that even he himself must have found annoying, and not from our classmates who we deprived of 10 minutes of a history lesson, but rather from Mrs. Matty Denton, who must have had the unenviable task of attempting to remove royal blue platinum ink from the cuffs of one of her husband's shirts, but as us astute pupils noticed, the ink didn't come out for months afterwards. I can only ask your forgiveness. Very humble, Greg. It's an interesting use because every school has its particular fads. I hadn't heard of blue tack being a particular fad before, but very interesting to turn it into an ink bomb. The teacher was asking for it and he followed his routine and he got caught out. Ink everywhere and fancy hitting Pritchard on the front row. It's like the Bass Street Kids all over again. What do you think, Sister Pauline?
I think it was pretty impressive, actually, that they came up with this retaliation against the stealing of the blue tack, and I don't feel too sorry for Mrs. Matty. She could have just found some excuse to get rid of the shirt. She
Mr.
didn't have
Matty
to,
could always do his
She didn't
own.
have to throw herself on the I'll keep scrubbing your shirt forever. She could have just burnt a hole in it with an iron, like some people might have done when they were sick of that particular shirt. I don't know, I'm just speaking.
Hello.
I'm just speaking generally here. Oh, I don't iron.
Is that your standard thing?
I don't iron.
If your other half has got a shirt, you don't, or the one of your kids,
I just hide it or give it away. Hide it or give it away.
I
That's
think
just
there's
I'm
a
saying.
theme there. What do you think,
so
Noel?
yes, totally forgiven
Yes.
because I think that's pretty cool.
Nigel?
Yeah, I think that's what 11-year-old boys do, isn't it? And it obviously didn't affect Greg's education because mellifluous, stolid, and peripatetic. All
Very
in
good.
That. Yeah, I mean,
nicely
he's
pointed
going
out.
with the old vocab. And I do reminded me of a time with a pea shooter, which we used to fire moist paper, which we'd rolled up on our mouths at the board. Someone actually perfectly dotted the I when the master was writing on the board, and he just carried on and never dotted it. It was the most remarkable thing. So very similar, and I thought, well done, Greg. I thought that was a brilliant wheeze, and it always said on those cartridges, and all the bottles as well, because if you fill them up from a bottle, it would always say permanent ink.
Yes.
And I used turquoise because I was a little bit out there.
Oh, yeah.
One of
And
those.
italics pens as well. Italics
How about
writing.
that?
Oh,
Did you ever put any in your ear like these boys?
No, not mine, but I did Chris Brown-Humes. Yeah, he got some in his ear.
Brother Matthew.
This story very much plays to one of my prejudices,
Which you have many.
which is teachers trying to be everybody's mate and getting in. Oh, I'm going to get in on the blue tack craze. No, you're not. You're the teacher. Don't try to make like you're one of their mates. Ooh, I've been listening to the new Arctic Monkey CD. No, you haven't. You're just trying to appeal to them. You're the teacher. You're there to teach. So I am definitely going to forgive because, frankly, he had everything coming to him.
They were this week's confessions. Who did you forgive? Most importantly, send us your story, please, the one you've been mulling over for a while. You can change the names. You don't have to change the names because we'll do it anyway for you. It'll all be perfectly fine. Just send it to confessions@bbc.co.uk. And more next week. Don't forget the Weekly Mayo, available now and every Thursday.